Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. In this program, we discuss a range of issues. The platform for this program is the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPA is a policy research center housed in the University of Lahore and researches contemporary security and strategic issues. This program is part of that effort, and we aim to speak with national and international scholars and policy experts on a broad range of issues that have a bearing on Pakistan. So stay with me, and I will be back shortly with today's episode. Welcome back to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. In today's program, I'm going to revisit the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, a territory occupied by India and illegally annexed on August 5th, 2019. And it's not just with reference to the UN resolutions and other treaties, but also with reference to the constitutional fraud that India committed on that day by revoking what little autonomy was left of the state. A new book, A Dismantled State, gives readers not just in India and Pakistan, but across the world, great insights into what happened that day and what has been happening since. The book is authored by Anuradha Bhasin, who is executive editor of Kashmir Times, one of the oldest English dailies in Jammu and Kashmir. The newspaper was founded by Ms. Bhasin's illustrious father, Ved Bhasin, who was both affectionately and reverentially called the grand old man of English journalism in J&K. The late Mr. Bhasin was a fierce advocate of Kashmiris' right to participate in our dialogue on the future of Jammu and Kashmir. Ms. Bhasin, true to her father's spirit, launched a court challenge after the Indian government blocked internet and phone service in the region in 2019. She kept leading her newsroom through finding ways to keep publishing in spite of the blackout. More targeted efforts to intimidate Bhasin and her colleagues continued, including raids on their homes and offices and forcing the Kashmir Times to vacate its Srinagar offices and stop publishing one of its editions. I will speak to her about her book, which is both a personal as well as a broadly political account of what happened in J&K and what has happened since India revoked Article 370 on August 5, 2019. I will also, in the last segment, speak with Dr. Mubin Shah, a Kashmiri businessman who was in Srinagar to meet with the family and was arrested arbitrarily. In fact, Ms. Bhasin's book, among other cases, mentions Dr. Shah's arrest. Let me, before I go to Ms. Bhasin here, I have a few excerpts from her book. It's a book worth reading because it brings together a lot of information and also analysis. As I said, it's also a personal account. So let me just read out a few excerpts, short excerpts from the book itself. Clearly, the compact with India through the instrument of accession had been made on the condition that the question of the state's accession would be settled by a reference to the people. The accession, thus, was not permanent and irrevocable. It had to be settled by a referendum, which was principally agreed to by the Indian government before and after the dispute went to the United Nations. The presidential order of 1954, and this is basically a reference to going back in terms of when the hollowing out of the special status began. As a matter of fact, Mr. A.G. Noorani, a very eminent Indian lawyer, has written a definitive account of how that hollowing out was carried out. Ms. Bhasin also mentions that process in her book. The presidential order of 1954 and subsequent orders allowed the extension of almost the entire constitution of India to Jammu and Kashmir. 94 out of 97 entries in the union list were applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. 260 out of 395 articles of the constitution, as well as 7 out of the 12 schedules of the Indian constitution, were extended to the state before Article 370 was completely abrogated on 5th August 2019. And then at one point, and again this is an excerpt, she quotes a former Prime Minister of India, Gulzari Lal Nanda, who said in 1964, Article 370 is neither a wall nor a mountain, it is a tunnel. It is through this tunnel that a good deal of traffic has already passed and more will. So it's a pretty, prophetic kind of statement that Mr. Nanda gave. Ms. Bhasin also talks about the people of Kashmir, and these are the words that she uses in the book, and they're very strong words: feel emasculated, humiliated, and disenfranchised. She also talks about the fact that several petitions challenging the move were filed in the apex court within weeks of the action, but the Supreme Court of India has postponed all hearings on the matter indefinitely, first on grounds of the Kashmir situation and post-March 2020 due to the pandemic. While the litigations were put on hold, the government continues, and that's a very important point that she's making here, continues to extend central laws to J&K and repeal the erstwhile state's own laws. And as I said, it's also a personal account. So she says, both as a peace activist and a citizen, I seem to have been robbed of all agency in that very act of uprooting my world and placing it in a new orbit. In my 3 decades of journalism in a region where horror stories, shocking twists and turns are the norm, never had anything left me so compellingly paralyzed. The 5th of August 2019 was different. I stood frozen, numbed by the silence and invisibilization of swaths of population amidst arrests and curbs. So these are just a few excerpts, and I would strongly recommend reading the book because it's a great read. Thank you, Anuradha Bhasin, for being on the program. Let's begin with the personal in this. And I think the personal also, correct me if I am wrong, but having had the pleasure of meeting your late father, including when one of our delegations, of which I was a part, went to Jammu and Kashmir in October 2004, the personal also extends to a lot of work that your father also did with reference to Kashmir. Anuradha Bhasin.
Definitely, yes. I mean, today what I am, it is a lot of it is because of him, because of his influence in my life, his values that I imbibed both professionally and as an activist. And he'd been part of history of Jammu and Kashmir. Before he was a journalist, he was also in politics, and from his student days in 1940s. He had bbeen very active and had been a kind of soldier in the making of Kashmir, or trying to democratize it. And I think it was then for me a sense of loss, also because of the kind of work that he had put in to to talk about the need for more democracy in Kashmir, to talk about dialogue for the sake of peace, to talk about civil liberties of the people. And that was an investment of 70 years. Mine was 30 years, so yeah.
But let me ask you this. Like, you've mentioned this in the book also, and we know this from history also. I mentioned A.G. Noorani's book also in terms of how the special status had begun to be, eroded. And, we have a long history of the PSA and AFSPA, and PSA, as you mentioned, the crude irony of it, that, it was started by Sheikh Abdullah, and how ultimately his progenies were arrested under PSA. But there does seem to be a lot of difference between then and now, in the sense that, your father was one of those who wrote a very definitive investigative account of the Jammu massacre. I seem to think that if he were alive today, post August 5th, 2019, and he were to write that, that would probably not be possible.
No, it won't be. It is a very different time. In fact, I mean, even as I have faced, if I look at my own personal life in the last 30 years, we faced many challenges. I've seen colleagues facing challenges, not just my father, who in the 80s, there was a murderous assault on him also. But things moved, and there was some communication channels open with the government, whether it was for the politicians or for the journalists or for any activists. The state, in many ways, at least some sections of the state, acted as some kind of a buffer. There was always some kind of a communication. Today, all those channels are broken. So if you were to write something, the only response that you can expect from the government is intolerance to anything that is critical, and or at best just silence.
So, one of the things that I noticed, Anuradha, when I was doing this program on Indus News, that I used to get my Indian and Kashmiri friends on my program pre, August 5th, 2019. But immediately after that, I saw this, and I've actually written about this, that a number of people with strong views had begun to stay away from appearing on a Pakistani television channel, and privately would write to me that this could put them on the government's radar. So I sensed that there was some kind of environment of fear that was evolving and permeating the even the analyst writers community. Would you want to talk about that?
I don't know. That's always been a problem, and I would not single out only the Indian side on this. I think even in Pakistan, if you are critical of the Pakistani state and going to speak to an Indian channel, it's going to make things difficult for you, and vice versa. That's always been a problem, and we've always kind of tried to challenge that and talk about there is need for more networking. There is need to talk to each other. There's no harm in talking, and taking your viewpoints, whether it is critical of your own state or critical of the other state. I think there is need to talk. And yes, there's no kind of evidence to say that yes, so and so spoke on a Pakistani channel and that is why there was a crackdown right now. But yes, the sense of fear at present is so overwhelming that in Kashmir, locals are not even willing to talk to Indian media. So I think the fear would be much more if they're talking to Pakistani media, because of the way that the relations between the two countries exist and at present under the present regime.
Well, I mean, I don't want to make it about India and Pakistan, but the fact is that I belong to the other side of Kashmir, as you probably know, and I have been, and this is something that empirically I can prove because it's in black and white, that I have often been very critical of the Pakistani government's policy towards AJK. So, but I mean, the point is that there is, I don't know, you might have seen this recent BBC documentary on Mr. Modi and Godhra, and in the initial sort of where they're running the slides, they say, I don't remember the exact number, but 30 or 36 people refused to speak to the BBC on record. So there is a sense of that fear. But let me go back to another excerpt from your book. And you talk about Krishan Dev Sethi Sahib, who also had a very long and sort of illustrious career as a dissenter, as someone who worked for Kashmir. and you talk about his contribution to the cause of Kashmir. And then you also had an interaction with him after the revocation. And then you go on to say, and I quote, the irony that his son, Achal Sethi, as JNK's law secretary, was signing all the relevant papers, reversing everything that he, as in Sethi Sahib, had painstakingly built, couldn't have been any less traumatic. So, did you ask Sethi Sahib if he had a word with his son with reference to what was going on?
No, I could sense it. There was so much of pain there. I didn't want to rub salt on his wounds, but I'm sure that would have.
So tell me, Anuradha, uh, because your book also talks about what has happened since that revocation. Uh, Give me a sense of where things are going and where things are likely to go. Do you think that since you use these very strong words, emasculated, humiliated, and disenfranchised, any of that will be reversed at any time soon, or there's no possibility of that?
That can only be reversed if there is an outreach to the people of Kashmir. Right now, there is no outreach. In fact, whatever Kashmiri people, and by Kashmiri, I mean not just the ethnic Kashmiris, I also
I know.
mean people of Jammu and people from Ladakh, whatever their religion. There is a huge sense of loss because of the laws that are now being applied. They stand to lose both politically, socially, economically. They stand to lose their lands, and that is a big issue. And instead of offering them more democratic space, what the government has done is taken away everything. And I don't see in this kind of a situation that there would be any reversal of how the Kashmiris would they feel powerful, what would empower them. Um, it has to be some kind of an outreach, and some kind of a dialogue has to begin. Um,
So,
and
so
then
uh, who 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 will begin that dialogue? I mean, what would be the nature of that
that's
dialogue? In the
I
sense
mean
that
that being hypothetically, I'm speaking, and I don't see that under the present government that is happening, because what has been done with a design to to completely subjugate the people of Jammu and Kashmir, to marginalize particularly its Muslim community, and to possibly change the demographic nature of the only Muslim majority state in India.
yeah,
And
because
I,
in
yeah,
your book,
I
in
mean,
your
we're asking too much if this government, which has done all this by design, is going to start a dialogue with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, right now, even under the new structures, that okay, you've turned it into a UT, you've into two union territories, one which will have an assembly, and there have been no elections. There has been massive delimitation of boundaries, which is not even geographically or politically. It's a complete butchery of the boundaries, and yet they are not going ahead even with those elections, which may not even empower the people, because the power now lies in the hands of center directly. It's not even with the local governments, which whose politics earlier was manipulated, but there were certain issues that the local governments had in their hands, related to development, to the local daily needs of the people, and that sense of power is also gone.
absolutely, you talk about as title jackboot in the face, and the fact that there's been this constitutional fraud in and through which Article 370 was revoked. You also mention in the book about a couple of activists who were asked by the authorities that they have to give an undertaking that they will change their ideology and that they will not raise questions. And you raise questions about how can the state or courts or the executive determine what a person's ideology is, and whether dissent in and of itself becomes something that the state is not prepared to tolerate. So, my sense after reading your book is, and I agree with you, you've just said this here also, that at least as far as this particular dispensation is concerned, there is no real likelihood of a dialogue. They want complete surrender of the Kashmiris and completely break their spirit. But on this note, let me ask you something else, which is that in the event, of course, this is hypothetical, in the event that the dispensation at the center changes, and let's assume that the opposition parties or an opposition coalition comes to power, do you think that they would be able to reverse what has happened? And I ask this question because I have privately asked people affiliated with the liberal enclave and also people who are affiliated with the Congress party. And my sense is that they just simply cannot do it for political reasons.
Definitely, definitely. If you look at the past and you look at the whole history of 70 years, it's unlikely that anybody is going to undo what has happened. But there would be some kind of an outreach recently, I'm not sure if that satisfies the people of Jammu and Kashmir. But there's an ongoing the march of Rahul Gandhi going on right now, and I was listening to what Jairam Ramesh, one of the Congress leaders, said. He said, "No, we're not talking about Article 370. We're not going to restore it. We're talking about Article 371." Which is something similar to what India has in the northeastern states.
Yeah.
And they're talking about protection of land and businesses, and it can be a little healing. What probably people of Jammu and Kashmir today need, first of all, is a healing touch so that they can recover and they can feel a certain strength. They can feel alive.
But Anuradha, let me interject here. So
it might be a good. No, I'm saying it might be a good starting step, but it cannot be the end.
So another argument can be, and this is proven by social psychological studies also, that you oppress a people to the point where then if you offer them even a slight solve, that they will think that this is something which they have to grab, because otherwise they're just simply doomed. So it seems to me that it doesn't really address the core issue.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I didn't say it addresses the core issue. I am saying today the people of Kashmir, and we are all talking hypothetically. It's very difficult to say, who's going to give what. If Congress today is talking about 371, well, Congress's history hasn't been very clean on Kashmir.
Correct.
And would they actually do that? Would they make some pretense of an outreach? Would they reach out to people politically? Would they reach out to people economically? Would they roll back some of the decisions which give a sense of empowerment, give some kind of it's not about grabbing, it's about getting back, springing back to life. I think people today in Jammu and Kashmir, and particularly Kashmiris, they have been so oppressed. They need to feel like human beings. They need to feel like human beings, first of all, to be able to, and Kashmiris are resilient.
Yeah.
We've seen Kashmiris' resilience. They'll find a way to say what they have to say. And I think it's better that this in more creative ways than saying it violently. And if you annoy them, that's the only road you leave.
Yeah, but you also talk about how many young people, even though they know that their lifespans will be, somewhere from 5 to 7 months, they're still picking up the gun. But anyway,
Right.
we're going to take a short break and return to continue our discussion. So stay with me. Welcome back to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. I'm in conversation with Anuradha Bhasin, the author of The Dismantled State. Joining me with her is also Dr. Mubin Shah, a business person, was in Srinagar to meet with the family when he was arrested arbitrarily. Dr. Shah, thank you for being on the program. We're discussing what happened on that fateful day and what has been happening since then. And of course, Anuradha Bhasin mentions your episode in the book. So give me a sense of, and it's a pretty harrowing experience, your personal experience, also the experience of many others who were with you, and also those who are far less, shall I say, privileged, who are still, languishing in Indian prisons. So give us a sense of that experience and your takeaway from that.
Well, the basic thing is, that it was, an experience which naturally a person like me, or for that matter, any person should not go through. We were picked up at, in the morning of sort of after 12, on the 5th. So the fourth night, and 5th of August is my birthday. That the same day, and I was picked up by the police. They came to the house and jumped over the walls and, called me by name, that where I am. And I thought that previously, they had put me under house arrest when the GST problem was there in Kashmir. And I thought it is again the same. And because I had an illness at that point of time, when I was, that day particularly, I had a prostate problem, and just 2 or 3 days back before that, my catheter was taken out. So I was in sort of pain also at the same time. So they said, no, you have to come to the station. We just want to talk to you and all that. And
So they basically tricked you, because later, as it happened, you were incarcerated for almost a year. But tell our viewers,
no,
you were in.
no, I was incarcerated.
Sorry, you were incarcerated
For 4 months.
For 4 months. Okay.
For 4 months.
For 4 months.
Right.
And you were one of those
Right.
lucky people for which your family members had also lobbied the U.S. Congress. But tell us, you were basically in Srinagar not for any political reasons, but you were there to meet with the family. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, my sister-in-law passed away that year, and then after that, my father-in-law passed away, and I had come to, naturally for that purpose to Kashmir. I was used to travel between Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and Kashmir. And at that time, I was come just before that, and then I fell ill, and I got stuck in Kashmir. I would have or else gone back. Because of my illness and because of catheterization, I stayed back, and and I was caught in a situation that suddenly they took me in, and it was we didn't expect it actually at that point of time, because it was all sudden, and they had planned it in such a manner that, but I still, it was like a military operation. Military operation.
So
exactly like a military operation.
So having gone through that experience, and having been incarcerated, and having obviously observed what has happened since then, where do you think Jammu and Kashmir is headed? I asked this question from Anuradha Bhasin also. It does not seem that any of this will be reversed anytime soon, if at all.
the problem is that, it was in the agenda of the BJP, and they, by that, have won elections and all that. That is beside the point. But, they feel that by this, they have sort of re-annexed Kashmir. And actually, one of the officers came to me to see me in jail, and they told me that, you're a businessman, why you are against the state? I said, but I am not against the state as such, but we businessmen all want settlement of Kashmir. And they said, we have done settlement, 370 is gone, 35 is gone. I said, no, this cannot be the settlement because Kashmir will never agree to it. And number one. Number two, also, yes, settlement can be there if the UN Security Council resolutions are withdrawn. That will be the settlement if you feel like that is the way that you are wanted to re-annex Kashmir. So that was a discussion I had with him in jail, and I was see who is this man for which the whole Congress, is after them, or the pressure is being built by the American government on them to release me because and then they, initially, and then they withdrew the case of PSA. That is also another point that because my wife had gone to the Supreme Court, they did not. They did some hearings because normally these type of hearings, it takes 15 days because of such, it is the procedure in the Supreme Court. And it prolonged for 4 months. They were dilly-dallying, basically the people, the Indian government wanted us to sort of, they have to sort of teach a lesson to the people of Kashmir.
Right.
So that nobody will come out, dissent and all that. That is
right.
That is why. But I was fortunate.
Absolutely.
There, I think
Absolutely, you were. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Mubin Shah speaking with us. Before I close the program, let me go back to Anuradha Bhasin. Anuradha, Dr. Mubin Shah's case is not atypical. I mean, as a matter of fact, he was very lucky.
Yeah.
And the fact is that the thousands of Kashmiris still languishing in Indian jails. So you talked about, before we took the break, you talked about the healing touch. Would you suggest that perhaps releasing those Kashmiris would be a necessary, though not sufficient, step towards that?
So you need to start giving back at least what has been taken away. But do we envisage that happening right now? Perhaps not. And which probably makes it imperative even for the Western powers to probably say that, what is happening in India, which says that it is the largest democracy in the world. There's something very wrong in a part of the country that they have just fully integrated.
Right. Do you believe that there is, or there possibly can be a role here for the international community? There have been hearings in the US Congress also, elsewhere also, but it hasn't really reached that critical mass where it could become so hugely embarrassing for the Indian government that they might be under pressure to reverse this in some way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So you think the international community has a role to play in that?
Look, international global politics doesn't move by, on the basis of what is good for humanity. Unfortunately, it is guided by basic political needs of a certain country, the economic needs of that country, and that's how things work. So it's a continuous struggle. And for people who believe in liberty and democracy around the globe to push their leaders to say enough. And
okay, one final question before we close. You begin your book with a very interesting episode in terms of how Indians in mainland India have otherized the Kashmiris and have really no knowledge about Kashmir. When one of the officers at the airport actually asked Ms. Andrabi, who was traveling with you, do people live there? Uh, additionally, additionally, with this entire narrative of quote unquote terrorism emerging from Kashmir, uh, there is absolutely no empathy, it seems to us, no empathy left among Indians in mainland India to begin to look at Kashmiris as human beings, people who need to have a dignified life. Is that sense correct?
Yes, it continues. I mean, there are, of course, I won't, not to generalize things. There are, of
No,
course,
I'm talking about the
Indians
majority.
yeah,
Obviously, there are lots of,
majority, yes,
yeah.
majority opinion. You will say there is a lot of tourism right now going on, and of course, it's picked up. That's a fact. And so they go to Kashmir and they come back and they say, "Oh, why can't Kashmiris are so ungrateful. Kashmir is such a happy place. There's nothing wrong happening there. We spent a great time over there. They should also become part of this tourism project and happily embrace it and gain out of it." Now, tourism is only one small sector of Kashmir's economy. It doesn't connect to 100%. It doesn't impact 100% people, just about 10, 15 maximum, if you maximize that 20% people of Kashmir. And here you are offering tourism as a SOP. And what you've done is snatched the ground from below their feet.
Yeah.
How does this even square up? And for people in the same country to not be able to see that, to not be able to see the footprints, the huge footprints of militarization when they come for their holiday, it could be appalling for any
Absolutely.
person who is sensitive to the needs or the sufferings of other people. The same Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have been clearly desensitized. In fact, if one were to monetize the cost, you talked about tourism and 15 to 20% people affiliated with that. The Kashmir Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I think a couple of years ago, actually monetized the losses that ran upwards of $2 billion US, and I'm assuming that the situation hasn't really improved because of pandemic also and because of all the oppression that's going on. But thank you so much, Anuradha Bhasin. Thank you also for writing this book. And as I said, this is a must read. It's a kind of compendium that brings everything together, what happened on that fateful day and also what has been happening since then. And not just informative for people in India and Pakistan, but also for readers across the world. This is all for this episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Do like and subscribe to the CESPA channel. It helps us to bring quality discussions to you. Take care and goodbye.